times elsewhere is to be a shepherd of your flock. And thank you that not one person escapes your attention, your compassion, your mercy, your love. Lord, help us to be of the same sort, Lord, expressing your heart in compassion to those around us, and particularly, Father, to several in our church who have additional needs that need particular care. May we be a place that is known for acceptance and love and helpfulness. We pray for that gift of love upon us, and for sympathy and understanding and a real humility before one another. In Jesus' name. Amen. Now, I know it is hard to believe, hard to credit, but at one time I was even wilder than I am now. Is that all right? Yeah, it really was. When I was at university, I remember on one particular occasion, we took a birch tree that was about 40 feet tall, and had been chopped down. We took it into the girls' dormitory. And it wasn't too difficult to get it in, because then you were moving with it, but trying to get it back out again was quite hard for the authorities, because we left it there. I hope they don't know it was me. Anyway, I didn't lead it. I was just there. Honest. But one of the other things that we did, which had a slightly better point to it, was that we were trying to raise money by having the world's longest ever croquet marathon. Croquet marathon, out on the principal's lawn. We set up the croquet pitch, and we had the big butt, and I was part of the support team. But there were 4 of my very good friends who actually did that, and we got in the Guinness Book of Records. Not me, but they did. And for several years, that was the longest ever croquet marathon. And it was extraordinary because it went day and night. They got 5 minutes off an hour, and we had to be there to support them, to make sure they were well fed, cared for, supported. And I was utterly astonished, because I had not realized just how important sleep was until that point. I could go off, because the team was bigger than just a few of us, I could go off and grab a few hours sleep and then come back, but they did not sleep for over 60 hours. And near the end of it, they were very seriously in trouble. To the point where one of them, my very good friend, actually mistook me for his bank manager. Now, if you know anything about my ability with finance, you will know that is really, really stretching a point. But he genuinely did. And nothing that I said to him would convince him that I was Chris, his friend. He saw me as his bank manager, and he was asking me very sensible questions on the basis that that's who I was, but completely nonsensical questions to a financial dunce like me. In the end, the doctor who was overseeing it had to ask us to stop, because he was afraid that there would be serious damage. Sleep is a need that we all have. And it isn't until you lose it, not just one night's sleep, but perhaps several nights' sleep, that you begin to see how much we need it. The same, of course, would be true for a number of things. We all have needs. We need food. We need water or liquid of some sort. We might be able to fast for a while. We might need to go without food for a medical reason for a little while, but eventually we will need it again. We also need significant level of warmth, and we probably need, rather than just want, social activity, some degree of friendship, someone that we know loves us and cares for us. So all of us have needs. Most of us have additional needs. In other words, there's something about us that needs a little bit more than everybody else. In my case, it's larger doors to get through. But in other cases, it's much more significant than that. And one of the great joys about this church here and this parish with St Barnabas and the Messy Church is that we gladly throw our doors open. I hope we throw our hearts open to a whole range of people who have those additional needs. And if we're going to be the shepherds, those who care for one another, those who say, that's family. There's Liam, he happens to be in the front row. He's family. There's Elizabeth, there's Helen, there's Jenny and John. They're my family. They're my sisters, brothers, friends, and actually we're related. We're blood related by his blood, not our own. If we're going to be family, and if we're going to obey the Lord's call to love our neighbours as ourselves, we've got to have at least a degree of understanding, so that there can be sympathy, comprehension of what the needs might be, understanding of why that's happening and not that, all that sort of thing needs to go on. But also we need to find the strengths. Some of the people with the greatest levels of additional needs amongst our congregation have also got the greatest amount to give if we will be ready to receive from them. To me, it's been a great joy. It's a joy before I came here. One of the things that attracted me to this parish is the level of contact with Osborne House. a home for people with learning difficulties. And that's continued, even though the house is being knocked down at the moment. Our friendship with the members and residents is still continuing. But there's lots of other connections with people with all sorts of additional needs in this congregation. And it's thrilling that before I came, they started Parchment Trust, which runs Friary Gardeners and many other wonderful things. And there's a whole range of things going on, not least Heather's group, helping hands for those with mental health issues. We want to be a church that says everyone's welcome. Doesn't matter your disability, it doesn't matter your additional needs. We want to say, yes, please, come and join us. You are welcome. We will try to understand you. We'll try and listen to what we could do to help you. And we will try and let you do everything that you can and contribute to this church as well. In a word, I suppose, we are called to love, aren't we? We know that, and we know it's something that God's particularly emphasising at the moment. And in June and July this year, we'll be doing a whole series on the practicalities of that. How to forgive one another, how to speak well of one another, humility, kindness, patience, things like that run out the practicalities of love. Indeed, last week, John Hawkins spoke on that passage where Peter is restored. You remember he's denied Jesus 3 times. He's now restored by saying 3 times to Jesus, Lord, I do love you. And every time after that, as John mentioned last week, Jesus recommissions him and says, okay, if that's the case, if you love me, do something to my sheep. Don't just love me, don't just love God, but actually feed my sheep, care for my little lambs. That's the call to every single one of us. And that's why Ezekiel 34 actually speaks to us today. The passage the prophecy came to Ezekiel when it was the leaders of the people of Israel, God's people, who were disobeying God. In their own heart, as John read it really well for us, in their own hearts they were saying, what can I get out of this? I'm looking after the sheep. Right, well, I'll have a few for my Sunday dinner. I won't feed them, I'll feed myself. And God speaks through Ezekiel and says, no, that's not the way I am. I'm always about giving, about caring, about understanding, about feeding. And in particular, verse 4 of that passage from Ezekiel 34, God says through Ezekiel, you have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. Instead, you have ruled them harshly and brutally. The moment Ezekiel says it, surely those people then, and surely any of us now who are doing anything like that, realize it's wrong. It's not in the heart of God. But he goes on a little bit later on, verse 10, to say the opposite. If those shepherds, if those leaders are going to be like that, then this is the way God's going to be. This is the way you and I are called to be. Verse 10, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I'm against those shepherds, I'll hold them accountable. We're going to be held accountable for how we interact with God's people here. I will remove them, he says, from tending the flock and so on. And then verse 11, for this is what the sovereign Lord says, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. I'll do it. If no human being will, I will look after them. All of us are called to look after everyone, actually. Some of us have a particular role in church life. You're authorised to be a house group leader, a neighbourhood link person, a visitor, somebody in the ministry team, a children's work leader, all sorts of things. But every one of us is called, even if we're not members of this church, but of another one, we're called to be carers, to look after people. And looking after someone with very particular, what used to be called special needs, now called additional needs, that requires that we understand and that we do our best to care for them. In the book of Proverbs, there's 2 bits that I just want to quote to show you just how serious this is. Proverbs 14 verse 31, whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their creator, but whoever is kind to the needy honours God. If we're kind to the needy, we're honouring the God who has made them and us. Proverbs 22 verse 23, don't use your position to crush the weak, because God will come to their defence. If you do anything that would crush a child, a vulnerable adult, anybody in need, if you do that, be careful, you might have God against you. You might have God defending them against you. So it's a call to every one of us that God is concerned for the needy, and he's put us in this funny family and given us a responsibility for one another. Now, I get to look around at you most Sundays when I'm preaching, and you get to look at me, and you can see how funny I am. Well, it looks just the same from here, just multiplied a few times. We're an odd bunch. That's the way it should be. There should be a wide variety of people. Nobody quite like me, nobody quite like you. A variety of people deliberately. Rejoice in who you are, and rejoice in who somebody else is. And if they're different from you, in any way, have a think what it must be like to be them, and enjoy what they can give you, and support them in their particular needs. That's part of family living. It's sometimes tough. It sometimes requires patience and kindness beyond ourselves. But the Lord is with us when we seek to do that. So, we're going to have a look at what additional needs there might be. The particular ones, the ones that our medical science and other people have actually begun to understand, and some of them fairly newly understand. I am by no means an expert. I'm doing my best to understand. So if I say anything wrong, if I offend anybody, please forgive me. It's not intentional. I'm trying my very best to cover a huge range. And that's why I put it up here. And this is visual aid number 1 in how not to do it. Right? Because if anybody amongst us has sight impairment, this will be utterly useless to them. But it's reminding me of where we're going. So forgive if you can't see it, but I will read it all out, so it's okay. Number 1, there's lots of additional needs. There's all that lot. And there's probably other ones that I shall miss out. Number 2, everyone down here is somebody in our church, at least one, if not many. Because we are glad to open our doors and our hearts to them. I'm not an expert. I will do this all too briefly, I'm sorry, but we'll do our best to try and cover it, just to show you not only the needs there might be, but also to explain to some who perhaps don't know this far, why does this happen in church? Why does so-and-so run around? Why does this happen and we don't discipline them, and so on? Some of the time, it isn't because we're lax as a church, it's actually because that person has a particular need. And it's love, not laxity. It's kindness, not lack of discipline. Okay, I've divided up, just for the sake of me really, into 4 things. Physical things, social things, emotional things, mental things. Of course, they overlap, and each one will have effects in the other areas as well. But this will have to do as a quick run-through of just a quick guide to additional needs. And we start with the physical, and some very obvious. There are people with their muscles all bound up or their bones crumbling away, some that need wheelchairs or other mobility aids, anything that will help. Oh, you can see it, can you? That's not bad. Yeah. You see, it's getting there. Forget me, do the list. Is that all right? That's much prettier. Okay, hey, there we go. Wonderful, thank you. The technological people are wonderful. So, these are very obvious. But one of the problems that I used to have, I think I inherited it from my dad actually, is to assume that if somebody is that bound up and they're in a wheelchair, then their mind must be similarly useless. And I remember treating one person as if they were an imbecile as well as in physical difficulty, and discovering that they were far more intelligent than me, although they struggled to communicate it. That's another thing. People's speech might be impaired, might be hard to understand them. But, again, they may be more perfectly intelligent. Or their sight. So important that we actually do print things bigger than this, and thank goodness for the technology that enables that, so that most of you at least can see that. But there'll be people whose sight is impaired, who can see some things, but not others. There'll be other people who are completely blind. We've got at least 2 members in our congregation, and one who visits occasionally, who are completely blind and need particular help. We've got people who are hearing impaired. Therefore, we've got not only a sound system, but we've got a loop system where you can twitch the thing on your hearing aid, and hopefully that will cut out the extraneous sound round about you and enable you to hear just my voice, you poor things. I'm delighted that Andre is often available in church to do signing. She signs for people so that they can understand what's going on, even if they can't hear the words at all. And probably the reason for her not being here today is that she is at the deaf church, where she goes to once a month, and a whole host of people gather there from a wide range, and the entire service is sign language, including them all signing the songs. They all do it together because it's part of their worship. And I just think that's fantastic. But our care for them is necessary. Now there's two that you may not have come across before. That's why I've put them in inverted commas, because I wanted to remind myself to let you know what they are. Dyspraxia, getting better known, so maybe more of you will have heard of it, but not everybody perhaps. Dyspraxia is an inability to do practical things, hence the name. It may be that your small muscle control isn't so good. You can't do the detailed things. It may be that running or doing any physical activity is quite a struggle, or that even if you can do it, you can't do it very well, and other people run much faster than you and outstrip you. It can be quite a difficult thing, and you may look like you're slightly unusual in the way that you do things. Dyspraxia may be the problem. The next one down, myotonic dystrophy. I've learned how to say it now. And even how to spell it, actually, I think. I got it right. It's all right. Thank you. We've got at least 2 of our members who are suffering with that, and it is a very serious condition from which some people do not survive, I'm sad to say. But it will cause particular things, and I've written down a few things here. One of the things is that they find it incredibly difficult to stay still. Now, I know that's true of all children and quite a few adults just because we're who we are, but in these cases they find it extremely difficult to stay still and keep attention on something. If they are required to stay still, they might simply drop to sleep in the middle of anything, school lessons included. And that's not that they're being naughty, it's just their condition. They might easily interrupt what's going on or say or do things that to many of us we would think that's a bit inappropriate, that's a bit over the top. But it's part of their condition, part of their joy, actually, because some of the time they say the very things that need saying, and the rest of us are too embarrassed or shy to say them. But anyway. Can't read what I wrote down there. And there are other chronic illnesses that people have. Some of them fairly small things, but because they've gone on for so long, they've become very debilitating. Some of them very large things, of course. All of these and all the other things, it's so important that we perhaps ask the person, ask a parent or carer, what will help? Or be ready for them to say, actually what you're doing now won't help, please could you do it this way? It's part of loving to learn what will help. Social needs. You may think that's not so significant. Oh, but it is. And it can be much more difficult in some ways. There's the basic one of shyness. Many of us, including me, I'm shy, and I struggle with doing what I'm doing right now. But there are some much more significant than that. You can overcome shyness to some degree, if you wish to, but it still can be a struggle. There's ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. I didn't have room to put that one up there. It's a fairly newly understood, or beginning to be understood condition, which tells us that not every child, for example, who is misbehaving, is not concentrating, is speaking out of turn, not every one of those is actually being naughty. Some of them have this particular condition. It's now something that doctors can actually diagnose, and the child can be statemented and so on if need be. And it's actually very difficult for them. You may notice, if you ever go into clash, that many of our children have that, and some of these other things that I'm mentioning here. We have the highest proportion we've ever come across of additional needs in our particular children's work. It's great to have that whole range, including those who don't have any particular additional needs. But it's hard work if you're running Clash, for example, or Rock Solid, and some of them really find concentration difficult. And you have to keep switching the variety. But the problem with that is the next lot don't like too much variety. So we're talking here about the autistic spectrum. It used to be just autism. But now we realise there's several varieties of it, including Asperger's. And there's also a spectrum of levels of it. Many of us have a degree of that. We're not so good at picking up the signals of other people in the tone of language, in the facial expression. People with severe autism simply do not understand anybody but themselves. They cannot. It's not that they're being difficult, they just can't get those signals in any way. So their concentration is difficult, their socialising is so difficult, and what they need is certainly not overstimulating, but they like to be able to predict what's going to happen, to know what's going to be the next thing. Some of you may have been watching a programme on at the moment called The Politician's Husband. If you've been seeing that, on one occasion the dad has to take the boy who has autism to school, and he inadvertently takes the boy by a different route to the one that mum takes every day, and the boy goes mental. And dad says, it's all right, it's the same, I'm getting to the same place, it's all right, but no, it won't do, because it wasn't predictable. It wasn't the normal way. In the end, he had to turn the car around, go back and start on the route that the son was used to. Autism and Asperger's, often Asperger's people are incredibly intelligent, but they find it very difficult to mix with people or understand what's going on with anyone else. So physical, social, emotional. There are people among us, and many others, of course, beyond our membership, who have had such abuse in their past that they struggle with a whole range of things. Many of us have had something, but these are folk who even the simplest things can become suddenly much more difficult because it reminds them very vividly of something that went on. In one case amongst us, it was the communion service itself that really she struggled with, because in her past that had been something very dark, very awful, and it had been totally misused by some very deeply anti-God people. And so for her, for a while, she's okay now, but for a while communion was a very big challenge. People with abuse, people who are depressed, sometimes temporarily because they're just going through a particularly bad time in their life. They had some trauma or some bereavement or something. Sometimes, frequently or even permanently, depression that seems, everything seems dark. You feel unable to shift yourself. I've had myself several bouts of depression through my life, and I know a little of how difficult it can be to feel any way forward. Where have we got to? Depression. Oh, and personality disorders, which I suppose is the next bit. Particularly emotionally, there are other consequences of this, but there are folk for whom any level of emotion, the exciting bits and the horrible bits, overwhelm them far more than they would the other average person. And so they find themselves reacting very, very strongly to whatever happens in their lives. Now, I'm an up and down person, as you all know, but I don't think I have a full personality disorder, but I know how difficult it is to cope with the emotions for folk that do. And finally, mental health issues. I've just mentioned a few, and I apologise if one's not there that really ought to be, but schizophrenia, all sorts of wrong ideas from past history about that. Basically, it means that somebody, at least at times, loses their grip on the things that are real around them and sees or hears things in a way that that is not true to the rest of us, but they believe it's true. So my friend, after his loss of sleep, genuinely believed I was the bank manager. And the only way in which I could work with him at that stage was to accept that I was the bank manager and talk with him as if that was true. Now, that wasn't dangerous or damaging. It wasn't even difficult. It was just an oddity of that moment. But for someone who finds that occurring a few times, or more difficult, I mean, a friend of ours, not in this church, but believed that his best friend, who'd been a best friend for years, suddenly believed that his best friend was out to kill him. So he tried to kill the best friend first. You know, it's that, and it was very, very real to the person who was suffering from that, very hard to get over. Paranoia is the one where you feel that everybody's against you. So I suppose the friend I've just mentioned had that as well. He expected that even people close to him were trying to attack him, trying to undermine him, talking behind his back, and so on. Brain damage. We've got at least one member of our church where he was attacked some years ago and suffered brain damage and has not recovered. He needs looking after, and that was a direct consequence of a serious beating that he got. Dissociative identity disorder, my goodness, it used to be called multiple personality disorder. It's a situation where the abuse that someone suffered is so intense they've had to separate the person who experienced that from the person they now are, and then they leave that person behind, and they may do that several times through their life, and now they might jump from their adult self, or whatever age they are, to being 3 years old, 10 years old, 14 years old, whatever it happens to be, in an instant, and then back again, or in, multiply between them. And that takes a good deal of working out, although we've seen one person almost completely healed of that. Obsessive compulsive disorder. That's the one where people are compelled to do something. Sometimes it's excessive cleaning, for example, and a vicar friend of mine, his wife sadly had this, and she got to the point of using bleach on the garden. She cleaned every wall, every flower, she cleaned the lawn with bleach. She took the carpet cleaner because she was so convinced that everything was unclean and it was going to hurt her and her family if it wasn't bleached, and it didn't do the grass any good, as I can tell you. But and there are much less obvious ones than that. There's the footballer who has to touch the grass before they go out to play because it's good luck, so they think. Not sure that it always helps, actually. They seem to win and lose just as much anyway. So, most of us have some degree of that. I like to have all the cups on the tray facing the same way. Sorry, I do. I like to have, all my deodorant bottles, in a nice line with the everything facing the side. I'd be a good shop assistant, wouldn't I? You have to do the shelves that way. But there we go. That's the way I happen to be. But other people have all sorts of particular compulsions that they do. Bipolar disorder. That used to be called manic depression. This is a much better title for it because they swing from pole to pole. Oh, you've got your earphones on there, Liam. Hello? Hiya. He's my friend, aren't you, Liam? We say hi a lot, don't we, mate? Now, what was I saying? Bipolar, they switch from one thing to the other. They can be incredibly high and excited. They've got great ideas, loads of energy, and then they can move, even sometimes in the same day, they can move to depression, sadness, no energy, nothing. And they move between those two. And that can be extremely hard for folk to cope with. Then, where have we got to? Nearly down there. Learning difficulties, my goodness, that covers a whole range of different things. Down syndrome is probably the best known of them. And we have members who have that condition. Indeed, our previous curate, Richard Mortimer, he and his family are delighting in little Timothy, who is a great joy and is making great strides. But he will be with that condition for the rest of his life and will need care, as well as bringing a lot of pleasure to his family and friends as well. And what else have I put down? Oh, dyslexia. Dyspraxia, dyslexia. Dyslexia is the one where folk find reading difficult. There are various different forms of it. Probably the best known is where the letters on the page jump up and down in a way that they can't actually see the letters enough to read them. They might find spelling difficult for similar reasons. For some people, a physical thing like changing the tint of their glasses can help, or changing the background paper. This is a bad example. You don't want black on pure white. It would be better if this was a gentle tint of green or blue or something like that. So forgive me for my insensitivity on that. But we need a great deal of understanding. Fortunately, on the internet, you can go and look these things up nowadays, and you can find fantastic amount of information, perhaps in some cases a bit too much information, but to understand. But sisters and brothers, all of these are people in our congregation. Some of them may be obvious to you already, but let me tell you, there's no condition that is missing amongst us. I'm pleased that that's the case. These are friends of mine. They may well be friends of yours. And they have additional needs. Therefore, we need to be doing our best to understand the overall situation, like I've tried to give all too briefly today, but also to go to them and say, well, I understand that you've got additional needs. What are your particular ones? How can I help you? Without saying, let me do everything for you. Because that's just as bad. Then they would feel patronised. And that's unhelpful too. So it's about caring. It's about family love. And that's what I put down at the bottom. Care and sensitivity. Just by the way, because we have that number of our children who have those particular difficulties, we need a higher staffing ratio than a normal Sunday school would need. The trouble is we've got a lower staffing ratio at the moment. We desperately need people to go and help, to learn with us about each child, what their needs are, and to find how delightful every one of them can be and how much they can give. It is so important that we have extra people. We're almost at the stage of overstretching our main leaders, and that they may have to say, I can't do this anymore. In which case we would need perhaps to give up one of our groups and have every service here as an all-age one. There's a threat now, isn't there? But we do need helpers. We also need further helpers in Messy Church once a month for the same reason. The number of people over there who have a proportion of these issues is quite high too. So please, please come and help us. This is part of our love, part of our responsibility. Even once a term would be brilliant. So come and speak to me, speak to Sarah Hackett in the Clash group, or Dick or Jim or Kim, or anybody in the, and I'm coming, in the Rock Solid. And Christian's just waving at me. Friday nights needs a bit as well. Oh yes, same reasons. And Friday nights we've got youngsters from the church and beyond the church in two groups, the younger and the older groups, and they would love to see people just helping. You don't have to have expertise, you just have to have care. One of the issues for us in the children's work particularly is consistent discipline. If all the children were the same, consistent discipline would be easy. No problem. You know, if you do that, you're out. If you do that, it's okay. You know, we could build up a thing. But the reality is we've got some, for example, who can't stay still, and some that need variety, and we've got some others that can't cope with things that aren't expected. It's a bit of a struggle. And at times we get it wrong, though much of the time we get it right, because there's tremendous commitment from the leaders there to try and understand, to talk to the children, to talk to parents and carers, to try and find out what would help. And we're doing still more on that. We're trying at the moment to put together a policy document about additional needs across the parish, children and adults, you know, everything that we do, Messy Church and so on included. And we're doing our best to understand how to do that. But we're trying. Oh look, they've changed the background. That's easier for dyslexics. Thank you. Right, up on the screens, it's gone to a different colour. Wonderful. Wonders of modern technology. So when we discipline one child, we might have to discipline another one in a completely different way. And other children then get confused. Why are you doing that to Jimmy? We haven't got a Jimmy. When you're not doing that to so-and-so, you know. And actually we've had many times to explain to the whole group, look, Jimmy's got these difficulties, so-and-so's got those difficulties. You know, you need to understand. And they've been brilliant. The children have been superb at understanding that people actually have to be treated differently sometimes because of their condition. They've been incredibly caring of one another, I'm proud to say. Indeed, sometimes they put us adults to shame, as usual. So, the final things that I wanted to say is those two words, prejudice and hurt. Prejudice, I wonder if, as we've talked about it, some of us have realised there's a prejudice in us. Oh, those children are too noisy. Oh, that person's never going to amount to anything. Oh, you know, they can't have any brain, or whatever it happens to be. Or why are they so difficult? I'm getting impatient with them. If there's a prejudice in your heart, if there's something that you've genuinely not understood, but you now realise, yeah, I've been wrong, perhaps in the quietness in a moment you want to say sorry to God. May even need to go and say sorry to some individual. But certainly, let's put prejudices aside. Let's try to understand better and realise all of us have needs. Some have additional needs. And, of course, there's also hurt. There's some people who have those additional needs who've been seriously misunderstood, perhaps badly treated, perhaps abused. And there will be other people who've been trying to care for them, where they got to the end of their tether. We had a mother within our congregation in this last week whose son, who has autism, suddenly completely let rip and beat her up and bit her quite badly. She's still got serious injuries from that. It's so difficult to be a parent, and some folks here who put up with that day in, day out, loving that child or those children with their particular needs, delighting in them, and it's hard work. And a lot of support needs to go to those. So if we've been hurt ourselves, or on behalf of someone we're caring for, or because of the lack of understanding or care, perhaps we need to be asking the Lord to forgive, if necessary, other people, but also to come and heal us. Because we've got a God who cares, we need to become a church who cares. Let's pray together, and then we're going to sing, believe it or not. Lord, for some of us this is old territory. We know most of it very well, and probably better than I've explained. But for others it might be new, and we may just be getting to understand some of the folk among us. And I just pray for that gift from you of compassion, to feel with the people around us, to feel with the parent who's caring for a child with additional needs, to feel with the vulnerable adult who's often suffered through life and may feel excluded and uncared for. Lord, we want to be a church that does care. Teach us the practicalities of that. Teach us to understand. Teach us to receive love as much as to give it. And Lord, where we've been prejudiced, please would you forgive us and set us right. And where we've been hurt, sometimes repeatedly, Lord, would you give us grace to go on hoping and trusting, grace to forgive where needed, and your healing into our hearts and our bodies, our minds, our emotions, our relationships. Lord, you said that when the shepherds would not care for the sheep, you'd come and do it. Lord, we don't want to be set aside. We want to be part of your caring for others in this community. So, Father, we ask that you would teach us to love for Jesus Christ's sake. Amen.